The frost came early that year, and it came mean. It settled on the thatch before the last of the harvest was in, and it stayed on the road like something that meant to be noticed. The village of Fenimore smelled of wood smoke and wet wool, and, underneath both, the thin, sharp bite of cold iron, the kind of cold that got into a well pump and would not let go until March. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Not ugly, not pretty either, not in any way that made men turn on the road. Meg Cardew was 24, thin through the wrists, with hands that had gone rough and red from work that other people's hands never had to do. She was a cobbler's daughter in a village that no longer needed a cobbler, because her father's eyes had failed him 2 winters back, and his hands shook now when they held an awl. She mended what she could. Mostly she mended boots, because boots were what people brought her, worn through at the heel, split at the toe. And she had her father's old habit of turning them over in her lap and finding, somewhere in the ruin of them, one seam still worth saving. The bridge over Cutter's Brook had been rotting for 3 years, and nobody with money enough to fix it had ever crossed it in the rain to see how bad it had got. That was not this story. This was a smaller thing. This was a pair of boots. Meg had one good pair. She had resold them herself, twice, with leather begged from a tanner who owed her father a kindness from years back, and she wore them the way a person wears the one solid thing they own, carefully, gratefully, without ever quite forgetting it could be taken from her. She was on her way to the well that morning, before light, because the well emptied out by midday when everyone else came for their water, and she liked the quiet of it. That was where she saw the boy. He was maybe 7. He was sitting against the churchyard wall, with his knees drawn up to his chin and his feet bare on the frozen ground, and he was not crying, which was somehow worse than if he had been. His feet had gone the colour of a bruise. He did not look at her. He had the look of a child who had learned that looking at people did not change what people did. Meg stopped walking. She did not think about it very long. That was the thing people would later find strange, when they asked her about it, and she would tell them honestly that there had not been very much thinking in it at all. She sat down on the frozen ground beside him and pulled off her own boots. Subscribe to the channel and stay through to the end of this one, it is worth it. The boy flinched when she touched his foot, the way an animal flinches, not from her exactly, but from the memory of every hand that had ever come near him. She did not flinch back. She worked his foot into her boot slowly, the way she worked a bad seam, patient, without hurry. And then the other. And then she stood him up and turned him twice to be sure the fit would hold at the ankle if he ran. "There," she said. "Now you will not lose your toes before spring." He said nothing. He had, she would learn much later, not spoken a word to anyone in 11 days. She walked home on the frozen road in her stockings, and her feet went white, and then red, and then they burned in a way that made her eyes water, though she did not let the water fall. She had learned long ago not to cry where it showed. Crying where it showed only ever brought questions, and questions cost more than they gave back. What she did not know, and could not have known, was that a man on a grey horse had stopped at the top of the lane an hour before first light, on his way somewhere he did not want to be recognised going, and that he had seen the whole of it from beneath the brim of a plain hat that hid a face half the county would have known on sight. He had watched a barefoot woman in the freezing dark give away the only whole thing she owned to a child who could not thank her, could not pay her, and would very likely never see her again. She had not looked around to see who watched. She had not performed it for anyone. She had done it exactly the way a person does a thing they believe no one of consequence will ever hear about. She did not know then that the man on the grey horse had turned back toward the road to Ellesmere, with something in his chest he had not felt in close to 2 years, since the fever took his wife and left him a widower with a silent daughter, and an estate that ran itself out of habit rather than love. She did not know his name. She did not know that within the week it would matter a great deal. The boy's mother came looking for him by mid-morning, wild with the kind of fright that only a poor mother knows, the fright of a child gone, and no coin to offer anyone for the finding. She found him sitting in the church porch, quiet, wearing a stranger's boots 2 sizes too large, and when she asked him who had done it, he would not say. He never did say, not for years, but the boots were good boots, sturdy, freshly resoled, and someone in the village recognised the stitching soon enough. Meg Cargey's stitching had a particular slant to it, tight and even, the kind you noticed if you had ever paid her in flour to mend a heel. They came to thank her. She would not have it. I would have done it for anyone, she told the vicar's wife. Standing in her own doorway in a pair of her father's old boots, 3 sizes too big, stuffed with wool at the toe. It is not a kindness worth a visit. Please, do not make more of it than it was. The vicar's wife tried to press a shilling on her. Meg's hands went behind her back like a child refusing sweets. Keep it for the boy, she said. He will need shoes before he needs my thanks. Word of a thing like that does not travel loudly in a village. It travels the way water finds a crack in a stone wall, quietly, and it gets everywhere eventually. It reached the housekeeper at Ellesmere Hall inside of 4 days, carried by a laundress who had a cousin in Fenimore, and the housekeeper, a spare, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Pruitt, who had run that house for 11 years and buried a duchess in the churchyard behind it, filed the story away the way she filed everything, without comment for later use. She did not yet know that His Grace had already heard it. He had heard it from his own mouth, in his own memory every night since, replaying itself behind his eyes at the hour he could not sleep. He did not speak of it, not to his steward, not to his sister-in-law who ran his table and his opinions with equal confidence, not even to his daughter, who would not have understood it, because his daughter had not said a full sentence to another living soul since the day her mother was buried. He rode past Fenimore Church twice more that week. At hours no man of business would ride anywhere, and told himself it was for air. The house he came home to smelled of beeswax and cold stone, and, faintly, of the lavender his late wife had kept in every room, and no one had had the heart to stop ordering. Ellesmere Hall was very large and very quiet, and the quiet had a particular weight to it since the fever, a kind of held breath that never let go. His daughter Ivy was 6 years old, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, and she had not laughed since the funeral. She sat where she was put and ate what she was given, and answered questions with a nod or a shake of the head, and the physicians had run out of things to try, and her aunt had run out of patience for trying them. She will grow out of it, Lady Cordelia said often, in the particular bright voice she used for things she did not believe. Children are resilient. It is only a phase, Your Grace, and coddling it will only prolong it. He did not think it was a phase. He thought, though he told no one, that his daughter had learned the same lesson the barefoot boy in Fenimore had learned, that the world took things from you without asking, and that speaking about it changed nothing, and so there was no particular reason to speak. He watched Ivy sit alone in the window seat that overlooked the drive, turning a small wooden horse over and over in her hands, and he thought of a woman on a frozen road giving away the one whole thing she owned to a child who could not even say thank you. He did not know yet what he meant to do about it. He only knew, with the flat certainty of a man who has run out of other ideas, that whatever it was, it would begin with Meg Cardew, though she would never be told why, and would never be told, for a long while yet, that he was the man who had watched her do it. Mrs. Pruitt was summoned to his study on the Thursday. She came in dry and composed, the way she came to everything, and stood with her hands folded while he told her, in the flattest voice he owned, that Ellesmere Hall required another undermaid, one steady with a needle, and that a girl in Fenimore named Cardew was said to have good hands for mending. Said by whom, your Grace, Mrs., Pruitt asked, because she had run that house for 11 years, and had never once believed a man hired a maid on hearsay alone. He did not answer that directly. See that she is offered the post, he said. Fairly as any post is offered. She is not to be told anything beyond that. Mrs. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. She had known him since he was a boy who cried at his own dog's grave, and told no one, and she recognised, better than he knew she did, the particular shape of a man trying very hard to be ordinary about something that was not ordinary to him at all. Very good, your Grace, was all she said. She did not know then that this was the first stone laid of something that would take the better part of a year to build, and would very nearly fall down twice before it stood. She only knew that a position needed filling, and that a duke who rarely troubled himself with the hiring of undermaids had troubled himself considerably over this one. The offer reached Meg on a Tuesday, delivered by a groom in Ellesmere livery, who looked faintly baffled to be delivering it to a cobbler's cottage at all. Steady wage, room and board, work with the household linens and, when needed, the boots and shoes of the family, given her known skill with leather. She read the letter twice at her father's table, in the light of a single candle, and her father, blind as he was going, heard something change in her breathing. "What is it?" he said. "A place," she said. "At Ellesmere Hall. Ellesmere," he said, and something in his voice went careful. "That is the Duke's house." "I know whose house it is," she said. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that a boy she had wrapped her own boots around 11 days ago had somehow, by some crooked thread she could not follow, brought this letter to her table. She told herself it was coincidence. She had learned not to look too hard for meaning in good fortune, in case looking too hard made it come apart in her hands. She did not know then that there was no coincidence in it at all. The first morning at Ellesmere Hall, Meg stood in the servants' hall in her one good dress, the collar gone soft with washing, and Mrs. Pruitt looked her over the way a woman looks over a horse she has already decided to buy, but wants no one to think she is pleased about. "You mend," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Not a question." "I mend," Meg said. "Boots particularly. My father was a cobbler. I learnt it at his knee before his eyes went." Mrs. Pruitt nodded once, filed that answer away with the rest, and turned to lead her up the back stair, and neither of them said anything more about it, because there was nothing more, on the surface of things, to say. What Meg did not know, walking up that stair with her small bundle of belongings, was that the man who owned the house she was about to work in had stood at his study window not 20 minutes before, watching the drive, and had gone very still when the gig carrying her turned in at the gate. He had not come down. He had told himself there was no reason to come down. A new undermaid did not require the master's welcome. He stayed at the window until the gig was out of sight around the side of the house, And then he stood there a while longer, looking at nothing, and Ivy, who had come in without him hearing her, watched her father from the doorway with the particular unblinking patience of a child who misses nothing and says none of it. She did not ask him what he was looking at. She had not asked a question aloud in 9 months. But she remembered, later, that it was the first time since her mother died that she had seen something on her father's face that was not simply tired. The work at Ellesmere was hard and honest, and Meg was glad of it in the plain way a person is glad of work that tires the body enough to let the mind rest. She scrubbed, and folded, and mended, and within the fortnight her particular gift found its way, as gifts do in a large house, to where it was needed. Boots came to her, first the footman's, cracked at the sole from the gravel drive, then a groom's then, on a wet Tuesday, a small pair belonging to Lady Ivy, soaked through and split at the seam from some solitary wandering in the wet garden nobody had noticed in time to stop. Meg mended them at the kitchen table by lamplight, turning them over the way she always did, finding the good seam, and she did not think much of it beyond the ordinary care she gave any boot that came to her hands. She left them outside the nursery door the next morning, dry and whole, and thought no more of it. They were stolen from her own room 3 mornings later. Not the child's boots. Hers, she woke to find her one good pair, resoled twice with borrowed leather, gone from beside the door where she always set them, and in their place, oddly, a small wooden horse, the kind a child might carry in a pocket, set down with what looked like great care exactly where the boots had stood. She stared at it for a long moment before she understood she was not still dreaming. She did not know then that this was the beginning of the part of the story that would nearly break her, and that the small wooden horse had been placed there, with trembling 6-year-old hands, on the very precise and very deliberate instruction of a man who loved his daughter more than he had ever managed to say to her aloud, and who had begun, without telling a single soul in that house but the housekeeper who already suspected everything, the strangest and most careful campaign of his life. Meg searched the servants' passage first, then the boot room, then, feeling faintly ridiculous, under her own narrow bed, before she gave it up and went to the kitchen in a spare pair of house slippers 2 sizes too small, red-faced. Expecting laughter, she found Mrs. Cobb the cook instead, who took one look at her feet and said nothing at all, which was somehow worse. "Someone has taken my boots," Meg said, because there seemed no way around saying it plainly. Mrs. Cobb's mouth did something complicated. Has someone now left me a toy horse in their place? At that, Mrs. Cobb's mouth gave up its complications entirely, and became a smile she pressed flat with the back of her wrist. "Ah," she said, "that will be Lady Ivy, then. God help you, girl, you've been chosen." "Chosen for what?" "Company," Mrs. Cobb said, and would not explain further, and went back to her bread. Meg found her own boots, eventually, in the branches of the low apple tree outside the nursery window, placed there with the exaggerated care of someone who had climbed with great difficulty and great determination, and when she looked up, she saw a small pale face duck back from the glass a half-second too late to hide. She did not scold. She had learned, mending boots for other people's children her whole life, that scolding rarely got you the truth, and that a child who wanted your attention badly enough to steal for it was a child worth more patience than anger. She stood beneath the tree and called up, not unkindly, "These are the only boots I own, you know. If the crows get them I shall have to come to breakfast in my stockings, and Mrs. Pruitt will have something to say about that." There was no answer. There never was, that first week. But the boots came down eventually, lowered on a length of embroidery silk that must have cost someone a scolding of its own, and Meg took them without comment, and put them on, and went to work, and said nothing to Mrs. Pruitt about any of it. It happened again the next morning. And the next. She began to leave the door unlatched on purpose. She did not know then, because no one told her, and it would have astonished her considerably to learn it, that His Grace the Duke of Marlow sat with his daughter for 20 minutes every evening that week, in the nursery with the door closed, coaching her in a low and careful voice on exactly how and when to take the new maid's boots, and exactly what small token to leave in their place, and that he did this not as a game for its own sake, but because a physician in London, consulted at great expense and greater desperation, had told him that a silent child sometimes needed a single safe person to practice being a person with again, someone outside the grief that filled every room of her own house, someone with steady hands and no history with the dead mother at all. He had watched a stranger give away her only boots to a boy who could not thank her. He had thought, in the weeks since, more than he would ever admit to anyone, about what kind of person did that, and he had begun to believe, with the particular desperate logic of a father who has run out of other ideas, that a woman who would strip her own feet bare in the frost for a stranger's child might be exactly steady enough, exactly patient enough to coax his daughter back into speech, if only the two of them were given a reason to keep circling each other. The boots were the reason. He had built it himself, piece by piece, the way another man might have built a bridge. He did not tell Meg any of it. He told himself at first that it was simply not her business, that a father's arrangements for his own daughter's care needed no explaining to an undermaid. Later, when the thing had grown larger than he had planned for, he told himself it was too late to explain without making it stranger than it already was. He was wrong about that, though he would not learn how wrong for some months yet. Meg saw him only rarely in those early weeks, and always at a distance, crossing a hall or standing at a window. A tall, grave man with a face that looked, she thought once, and then scolded herself for thinking, like a door that had been shut for a long time and had forgotten how doors were meant to open. He did not speak to her. She did not expect him to. Dukes did not speak to undermaids about anything at all, and she had no reason to think this one an exception. She did not know that he watched, from that same shut-door face, every small progress the boot game made. She did not know that the evening ivy first left a folded scrap of paper in place of the wooden horse, with a single crooked drawing of a horse on it. No words. He had gone into his study afterward, and stood at the window for a long time with something wet at the corner of one eye that he wiped away before anyone could have seen it. Had anyone been there to see? She only knew that a strange, silent, dark-eyed child had begun, very slowly, to leave her small offerings instead of only taking, and that when she caught the child watching her from doorways now, the child no longer ducked away quite so fast. "You do not have to steal them, you know," Meg told her one grey morning, crouched to the child's height in the passage. "Holding out the boots before Ivy could take them, you could simply ask to walk with me. I would say yes." Ivy looked at the offered boots. She looked at Meg's face. For a long moment she said nothing, which was not unusual, but then, in a voice gone rusty from disuse, she said one word. Why? It was the first word Meg had heard her speak. It was, though Meg would not learn this for months, the first word anyone in that house had heard her speak in 9 months and 11 days. Because, Meg said, keeping her own voice very even, very unremarkable, so as not to frighten the moment away, Everyone deserves someone to walk with, even dukes' daughters, even undermaids. Ivy did not answer that. But she did not run either. She stood there a moment longer, and then she reached out and took the boots from Meg's hands, instead of stealing them, which was, Meg would understand only later, the larger thing entirely. Word of that single spoken word reached the Duke by supper. Mrs. Pruitt told him herself, in the study, with her hands folded and her face carefully blank, because she had decided some time ago that whatever this was, it was working, and a thing that worked deserved to be told to the man paying for it in more than coin. He sat very still when she told him. He did not say much. He asked her to repeat the word, as though he had misheard it, and when she repeated it he put his hand briefly over his mouth, the way a man does when he does not trust his own face. "Thank you, Mrs. Pruitt," he said when he could. "You ought to thank the girl," Mrs. Pruitt said, with the particular dryness she reserved for the moments she judged a man needed steering. "Not me. And your Grace ought to consider, before too much longer, whether the girl deserves to know why she was hired." He did not answer that at once. "Not yet," he said finally. "It is working, Mrs. Pruitt. I will not risk it for the sake of my own comfort." Mrs. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment, the way she had looked at him since he was a boy, and did not say what she was thinking, which was that comfort had very little to do with what he was risking, and that the longer a true thing stayed buried, the harder the ground grew over it. She curtsied and left him to his study, and he sat there a long while in the last of the daylight, thinking about a woman on a frozen road who had given away everything she had to a child who could not even say thank you, and about his own daughter's rusted, rediscovered voice, and about how strange a thing it was that both of those gifts had come, in the end, from the same pair of hands. Winter thinned toward a hard, bright cold, the kind that made the gravel ring underfoot and the breath show white even at noon. Ellesmere Hall settled into the rhythm of a great house in its quiet season, and Meg settled into the rhythm of it with her, though she remained, by design and by nature, at its edges. She mended what came to her. She kept her head down. She had learned, long before Ellesmere, that a servant who kept her head down was a servant who kept her place, and she had a father at home whose eyes had failed, and whose hands shook, and who needed the wage she sent him more than he needed her opinions on anything. The boot game had become, by the turn of the year, something gentler than a game. Ivy no longer stole. She asked, in short, rusty sentences that grew a little less rusty each week, and Meg answered, and the two of them had taken to walking the kitchen garden together in the hour before dusk, when the light went long and gold, and even the frost looked, briefly, kind. It was on one of those walks that Lady Cordelia found them. She was the late Duchess's sister, a tall, handsome woman with the particular beauty that ages slowly and expensively, and she had installed herself at Ellesmere, in the year since her sister's death, with the settled certainty of a woman who believed the household required her opinions more than it required her grief. She loved Ivy in her way. It was not a gentle way. It was the way a woman loves a thing she has decided to improve. She came upon them at the garden gate, Ivy's small gloved hand tucked into Meg's rough bare one, and something in her face went thin and bright the way it did before her voice turned sweet in the particular manner that meant trouble. "Well," she said, and her laugh came out in 3 practised beats, a sound like a small bell struck too hard. "How very touching. The scullery maid and the little heiress, hand in hand like sisters." "Under maid, my lady," Meg said, because it seemed the smaller correction to make. "Is there a difference? Lady Cordelia said to a hand like that. She looked quite deliberately at Meg's hands, red across the knuckles, cracked at the first joint from lye and cold water, nails cut short and blunt for work. Meg did not hide them. She had learned long ago that hiding them only told a woman like this one that she had found something worth hiding. "They do the work asked of them," Meg said. "I have never known a hand ashamed of that." Lady Cordelia's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "How admirably plain you are," she said. "It must be a relief, I imagine, to have so little to lose that you cannot fear losing it." "Aunt," Ivy said, in her small, rebuilt voice, and it was the first time in months anyone had heard her say the word unprompted, and the surprise of it seemed to land on Lady Cordelia like a slap. "Go inside, Ivy," Lady Cordelia said, not unkindly, but not gently either, and something in the crispness of it made the child's hand tighten around Meg's before it let go. Meg watched the girl walk toward the house, small and straight-backed, and did not look away from Lady Cordelia when she spoke again. "She is only a child," Meg said. "Whatever quarrel you have with me, my lady, I would ask you not to have it in front of her." "I have no quarrel with you," Lady Cordelia said. "I have an observation. A house like this cannot afford to grow fond of hands like yours. Fondness confuses a child about her place in the world. And you, I think, ought to remember yours." "I know my place," Meg said. "I do not think you know it half so well as you believe you do, my lady. If you think it includes standing by while a lonely child is scolded for loving someone." There was a silence after that. It was not a comfortable one. Lady Cordelia's mouth thinned to a line, and for a moment Meg thought she had gone too far, had said the plain true thing too plainly, the way she always did, the way that had cost her positions before. "You will regret that tone," Lady Cordelia said softly. "Perhaps," Meg said. "I have regretted worse for less reason." She did not weep. She did not curtsy either, which she noted afterward, privately, with something that was not quite pride and not quite fear. She simply turned and went back to her work, hands steady, because steady hands were the only thing she had ever fully owned. What she did not see, because she did not look for it, was the Duke standing at the far end of the yew hedge, close enough to have heard every word, still enough that neither woman had marked him there. He had come out to find his daughter for supper, and had stopped at the sound of his sister-in-law's voice, turning sharp, and he had stayed to hear the rest of it, and something in his chest had gone hard and cold and entirely certain, in a way it had not been in a very long time. He said nothing to either woman that evening, but the next morning Lady Cordelia found her monthly allowance for the running of the nursery quietly redirected to Mrs. Pruitt's authority instead of her own, with a note in his own hand that said only that he wished the child's daily comfort managed by someone whose judgment he trusted absolutely. Lady Cordelia understood the message for exactly what it was. She said nothing about it at supper. She smiled her 3-beat smile and asked after the weather, and underneath the smile something in her calculations shifted, cold and permanent, toward the undermaid she had decided, from that morning on, needed to be gone from that house. Meg did not know any of this had happened. She only knew, some days later, gathering linens in the corridor outside the study, that she heard her own name spoken through a door left carelessly ajar, in the Duke's voice, low and even, and she stopped, not meaning to listen, and then found she could not make herself walk on. "Has done more for that child in 2 months than every physician you sent for in a year," he was saying, and his voice had an edge to it she had not heard before, something worn thin and finally showing through, I will not have her spoken to that way in my own garden. She is a servant, Julian, Lady Cordelia's voice, tight and careful. You are allowing a servant to raise your daughter's expectations of her own place in the world, and mine along with it, and one day soon the whole county will be asking why. Let them ask. A pause. I would rather my daughter learn kindness from a cobbler's girl than manners from a woman who cannot stand to see a child love someone she did not choose for her. Meg did not stay to hear the rest. She gathered her linens with hands that were, for the first time in longer than she could remember, not quite steady, and walked away down the corridor with her heart going hard and strange in her chest, and told herself firmly that it meant nothing beyond a fair man defending a servant he thought had been wronged. She told herself that several times, in fact, which was usually a sign, though she did not let herself notice it, that she did not fully believe it. She did not know then that the man behind that door had stood at a churchyard wall in the freezing dark 2 months before, and watched her give away her own boots to a boy who could not thank her, and had been, in his own quiet and complicated way, unable to stop thinking of her since. She only knew that something in the house had shifted, subtly, in her favour, and that Lady Cordelia's eyes, when they found her now, had gone from merely cold to something closer to calculating, and that a calculating enemy was a far more dangerous thing than a merely cruel one. She went on with her work. She went on walking with Ivy in the long gold hour before dusk. She told herself the ground under her feet was steady. She did not know then how soon it would give way, nor from what direction, nor how much it would cost her to learn the truth of the very thing she had come, without ever meaning to treasure most in that house. The weeks folded into each other the way winter weeks do, one indistinguishable from the last except by small mercies. Ivy spoke more each day. Whole sentences now, sometimes even questions, and the questions were the sweetest sound in that house to everyone who heard them, though only Mrs. Pruitt and the Duke understood quite how sweet. Meg's hands grew no less red, no less cracked, but she found, to her own faint surprise, that she had begun to hum while she worked, a thing she had not done since her mother died. She still saw the Duke rarely, and always briefly, and always with the same odd catch in her chest that she refused, out of long habit and longer caution, to name. He had taken, in recent weeks, to appearing in the kitchen garden at the hour she walked there with Ivy, standing a little apart, watching his daughter run ahead down the gravel path with an expression Meg could not read, and told herself she had no business trying to. "You are good for her," he said to Meg once, abruptly, without preamble, the words coming out of him like something forced through a narrow gap. "I do not say that lightly." "She is good company," Meg said, because it was true, and because she did not know what else a woman in her position said to a duke who spoke to her directly and without warning. "I did nothing but walk beside her, Your Grace." "That is not nothing," he said. "That is very often everything." He did not explain further. He rarely explained anything, she had noticed, though what little he did say tended to land with more weight than other men's whole speeches. She watched him go, that evening, with her heart doing the same strange thing it had done outside the study door, and told herself again, more firmly, that it meant nothing. It was Ivy, in the end, who broke the ground beneath her, though the girl never meant to, and never fully understood what she had done. It happened on an ordinary afternoon in the boot room, where Meg was showing the child how to work a stiff new pair of half boots supple with tallow and patience, both of their heads bent close over the leather, when Ivy said, in the easy, unguarded way children say the most devastating things, Papa says I did very well with the horse. He says I am learning to be brave like you, because you were brave first and I only had to copy. Meg's hands went still on the boot. What horse, sweetheart, she said, keeping her voice light, the way she always did with the child, careful not to let anything show that might frighten a fragile thing back into silence. The wooden one, Ivy said, matter of fact, already reaching for the tallow rag. I was to leave it every time I took your boots, so you would not be too cross to look for them. Papa taught me exactly how. We practiced in the nursery every night for a whole week before I did it the first time. Because I was frightened, and he said frightened was allowed. But I had to try anyway, because you had been brave first with the boy at the church. What boy, she said, though some cold, sinking part of her had already begun to understand. The one you gave your boots to, Ivy said, entirely unaware that she was pulling a stone out of a wall that had, until that moment, been holding something up. In the frost. Before you came here. Papa saw you do it. He told me about it, so I would understand why I had to be brave the same way, to get you to be my friend properly, because he said you were the only person he had ever seen do something for someone who could give nothing back. The boot room went very quiet. Meg set the half-boot down on the table with exaggerated care, the way a person sets down something they are afraid of breaking, or of throwing. I see, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was, she thought distantly, the only useful skill she had ever truly mastered. She finished the boots. She sent Ivy off to her supper with a kiss on the crown of her dark head, and a smile that cost her more than any smile had cost her in a long while. And then she sat alone in the boot room in the last grey light of the afternoon, and let herself, finally, understand what she had just been told. He had watched her, from the very first. Before she had ever set foot in that house, before she had a name to him beyond whatever a passing stranger's name might have seemed, he had watched her give away her boots to a barefoot child. And he had said nothing, not one word, in all the months since, while she scrubbed his floors and mended his daughter's boots and walked his gardens, believing, with the particular fierce private pride of a poor woman who has very little else, that whatever small friendship had grown between her and Ivy had grown honestly, on its own, out of two lonely people simply liking each other. Instead, it had been built. Engineered, a father's careful campaign, rehearsed in a nursery, deployed like a strategy, with her own unwitnessed kindness as its foundation stone, and her own unsuspecting heart as its intended destination, and no one, not the Duke, not Mrs. Pruitt, not one living soul in that vast quiet house, had thought her owed the truth of it, until a 6-year-old let it slip by accident over a tin of tallow. She did not cry. She had trained herself too well for that, and training like hers did not undo itself in an afternoon. But her hands, when she finally rose from the table, were not steady at all, and she stood in the boot room a long while before she trusted them enough to open the door. She found the Duke in the passage outside his study not 20 minutes later, summoned there, she suspected, by Mrs. Pruitt's quiet word that something had gone wrong. He took one look at her face and understood, with the particular swiftness of a man who has feared exactly this moment for months, exactly what had happened. Meg, he said, and it was the first time he had ever used her given name aloud in front of her, and it landed, absurdly, like one more theft. You watched me, she said, at the church, in the frost. He did not deny it. She would think, much later, that this was the one mercy he offered her that evening, the refusal to lie even by omission, even when a lie would have been so very easy. "I did," he said. "And you said nothing. Not when I came here. Not once, in all these months, while I thought I had found something of my own in this house. Something that was mine, that had happened between your daughter and me, by chance and by choosing, not by design." Her voice did not rise. It went, instead, very flat and very quiet, which was worse. "You built it. Like a bridge you meant me to walk over without ever knowing I was walking on your timber." "I did what I believed my daughter needed," he said. "I do not regret that part of it." "I am not asking you to regret your daughter," Meg said. "I am asking why you let me believe I was simply a woman a child had come to love, when I was instead a tool you had chosen for a purpose, and never once thought I deserved to be told." He opened his mouth to answer that, and found, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, that he had no ready words at all. "I am sorry," he said finally, and it came out rough. Unpractised, a man saying a thing he had almost no experience saying. "I meant to tell you. I told myself there was always a better week to do it in. There was never a better week. There was only ever this one, done badly, by accident through a child who trusted me to have already done what I had not." "Yes," Meg said, "there was only ever this one." She did not shout. She did not weep. She stood very straight in the dim passage with her red, cracked hands folded in front of her, and she said the thing she had come to say, plainly, because plainness was the only currency she had ever fully owned, and she was not going to spend it dishonestly now. "I will finish out the month, Your Grace, for the child's sake, so the change does not come on her too sudden, and then I will go home to my father. I think it is best." "Meg, I would ask," she said, and here, finally, something in her voice did shake, just slightly, just once, "that you not use my name so easily. You have not earned it. I am not certain tonight that anyone in this house has." She left him standing in the passage, and she did not look back, and she told herself, walking away with her spine straight and her hands finally, mercifully, growing steady again through sheer force of will, that this was the right thing, the honest thing, the thing a woman with any self-respect at all was obliged to do when she learned she had been managed rather than met. She did not know then that the man she left standing in that passage stood there for the better part of an hour after she had gone, and that when Mrs. Pruitt finally came to find him, she found him with his head in his hands in a way she had not seen since the week his wife died, and that whatever he said to her that night, in a voice gone entirely unlike his own, convinced the housekeeper of 11 years' standing that she had, for the first time in her long service to that family, watched her master come nearer to breaking than she had ever thought a man like him could come. The month Meg had promised passed in a kind of held breath she did not fully understand until it was over. She kept her distance from the Duke as much as a household of that size allowed, which was, she found, easier than she expected, since he seemed to be avoiding the same rooms she occupied with an effort that was almost tender in its clumsiness. She did not soften toward that thought. She told herself it was cowardice, not tenderness, and went on with her mending. She did not stay away from Ivy. She could not have managed that even had she wanted to, and she found, to her own quiet grief, that she did not want to. The child had done nothing wrong. The child had only been brave, exactly as she had been taught to be, and it was not Ivy's fault that the teaching had been built on a foundation Meg had never agreed to stand upon. "Are you leaving because of me?" Ivy asked her, on one of their last walks, with the particular unbearable directness of a child who has only recently relearned how to ask anything at all. "No, sweetheart," Meg said, and meant it as fully as she had ever meant anything. "Never because of you. You have done nothing but be brave when it was hard for you. That is the finest thing a person can do, and I am prouder of you for it than of almost anything in my own life." Then why? Meg crouched to the child's level, the way she always did, and thought carefully before she answered, because she had learned that this child deserved true answers even when true answers were hard ones. "Sometimes," she said, "grown people build things for good reasons and forget to tell the truth about how they built them. It is not your fault when that happens. But it means something has to be mended before it can be trusted again, the same way a boot has to come apart at the seam sometimes before it can be sewn true. I am not leaving because I stopped caring for you. I am leaving because I need time to mend a seam that is not yours to fix." Ivy considered this with the terrible seriousness only children bring to such conversations. "Papa is very sad," she offered. "I know," Meg said, and found, to her own surprise, that she was not glad of it, though some small unworthy part of her thought she ought to be. She left Ellesmere Hall on the last morning of the month with her small bundle of belongings, and her wages folded carefully into a handkerchief, and Mrs. Pruitt saw her to the gate herself, which was not, Meg understood, an ordinary courtesy for a departing undermaid. "He is not a cruel man, Mrs." Pruitt said at the gate, in the dry, careful voice she used for things that mattered to her. "I have known him since he was a boy who could not say a true thing about his own grief to save his life. He has never learned to say the hard true things at the right time. That is not the same as never meaning them." "I know he is not cruel," Meg said. "I never said he was cruel." "No," Mrs. Pruitt agreed. "You said he had not earned your name. I have thought about that a good deal since, and I find I cannot fault you for it." She pressed something small into Meg's hand at the gate, a folded paper, and would not let her open it there, only told her to read it on the road home, and then she turned and walked back toward the house, without waiting to see it done. Because Mrs. Pruitt had never in 11 years' service been a woman who cared to watch her own kindnesses land. Meg read the paper a mile down the frozen road, sitting on a milestone with her bundle beside her. It was not from the Duke. It was a list, in Mrs. Pruitt's own careful hand, of a dozen small dated entries stretching back nearly 2 years. A doctor's bill for a village family, paid anonymously. A roof mended for a widow with 6 children, the mason's fee settled by a benefactor who asked not to be named. Boots, so many pairs of boots, left at church doors and crossroads and cottage steps across 3 parishes, every winter for 2 years running, with never a note attached beyond the same 6 words, written once at the top of the mason's receipt, where the recipient had happened to see it before the paper was meant to be burned. He asked not to be thanked. At the very bottom of the list, in ink slightly darker than the rest, as though added later and in some haste, was one final line. Rent and physician's fees for Josiah Cardew, Fenimore, settled quarterly since the autumn before last, at his Grace's private instruction, unbeknownst to the recipient. Meg sat very still on the milestone for a long time. Her father's rent. Her father's physician, the one who had come twice that winter for his chest, and once unbidden for his eyes, and had never once presented a bill she could remember paying. She had assumed, when she thought of it at all, that the village had simply been kind to a blind old cobbler, the way villages sometimes were. It had not been the village. It had been him. long before the church wall, long before he had ever known her name. If the dates on that list were to be believed, he had been paying to keep her father fed and doctored, quietly without credit, the same way he had left boots at crossroads across 3 parishes for 2 winters running, asking nothing, wanting no one to know, not even, it seemed, entirely certain himself why he kept doing it. She thought of the words Mrs. Pruitt had used. He has never learned to say the hard true things at the right time. That is not the same as never meaning them. She sat on the milestone until the cold drove her up, and she walked the rest of the way to Fenimore, turning the list over and over in her mind, the way she used to turn a worn boot over in her lap, looking for the one seam still worth saving. Her father was overjoyed to have her home, and frailer than she remembered, and it was 3 days before she found the courage to ask him, gently, whether he had ever wondered how his rent came to be so reliably paid these 2 years past. "I always thought it was your wage," he said, surprised. "You never said different." "No," she said, "I never did." She did not tell him the whole of it that night. She sat by the fire with the list still folded in her pocket, and she thought about a man who built elaborate campaigns for the people he loved and then could not find the courage to explain them, and about how strange it was that the very same failing that had wounded her was underneath it, made entirely of the same stubborn secret goodness that had kept her own father clothed and doctored for 2 winters without her ever knowing whose hand it was. She did not know, sitting there, that within the week that same hand would knock at her own door. He came on a bitter grey morning, 9 days later, on foot, without his carriage, without any of the trappings a duke might have brought to announce himself, and he stood at the cobbler's cottage door, in a plain coat, with his hat in his hands, like a man who had walked the whole distance turning his own words over, and had still not found the right order for them. Josiah Cardo answered the door, squinting into the light he could no longer properly see, and it took him a long moment, and the sound of the visitor's voice asking gently for his daughter, before he understood who stood on his step. "Meg," he called into the house, his voice gone strange with the shock of it. "Meg, there is a duke at our door." She came to the doorway with flowers still on her hands from the morning's bread, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The village lane was very quiet. Somewhere behind the house a rook called once, flat and sudden, and neither of them moved until it had gone silent again. "You did not have to come," she said finally. "I know," he said. "I came anyway. I have come to say a true thing, and I would rather say it here, in your own doorway, where you have every right to shut it in my face, than at Ellesmere, where you might feel obliged to hear me out simply for the sake of politeness." She did not shut the door. She stepped back, instead, and let him into the small warm kitchen where the fire was going and the bread was rising under a cloth. And her father, with the tact of a man who had lived long enough to know when a room needed emptying, excused himself to the back garden despite the cold. The Duke stood in the middle of the small kitchen, looking entirely out of place in it, too tall for the low beams, too fine in a room where the chairs did not match, and Meg thought, watching him, that she had never once, in all her months at Ellesmere, seen him look less like a duke and more like a man who was afraid. "My name is Julian," he said. "You have never used it. I did not come here today to ask you to. I came to tell you the whole of what I did, plainly, in order, without leaving anything for a child to tell you by accident again." She said nothing. She only waited, hands still, the way she had learned to wait for hard things her whole life. "I saw you at the church wall in the frost," he said. I was riding somewhere I did not wish to be recognized going, and I stopped because something in the shape of what you were doing stopped me before I understood why. I watched you give a barefoot child the only whole pair of boots you owned, and ask nothing, and want nothing, and walk home in your stockings rather than let him see you regret it. I had not, in 2 years of watching my own house and my own grief and my own daughter's silence, seen a single person do anything so entirely without calculation. I wanted to know who you were when you believed no one of any consequence was watching. That is the only test I have ever trusted, Your Grace. It is the only test that tells the truth. Meg's breath caught faintly at that, though she did not let it show beyond a small tightening of her folded hands. So you hired me, she said. I hired you honestly, he said, for a post you were entirely qualified for, and I have never regretted a day of your work in that house. But I will not pretend the hiring was simple. I wanted my daughter near you. I believed, and I still believe, that you were the only person in reach of her who could teach her, without ever meaning to teach her anything, that the world still held people who gave without counting the cost of it. I built the boot game with her because I did not know how else to give her a reason to seek you out that would not frighten her, and because I did not trust myself to simply say to a 6-year-old, "Go and love this woman, she is safe." I taught her to steal your boots because it was a game small enough for a frightened child to survive, and I never told you. Because every week that passed made the not telling easier, and every week that made it easier made me more ashamed of it, until I no longer knew how to begin. He stopped. The fire cracked once in the silence. I was wrong not to tell you, he said. Not wrong to want it, wrong to hide it. You are not a tool I employed, Meg Cardew, whatever it must have looked like from where you stood. You are the reason my daughter speaks again. You are the reason I have begun, for the first time in 2 years, to think I might one day want something for myself again, and not only endure the days as they come. I did not plan for that part. I only know it is true, and I would rather you know the whole shape of it and refuse me than go on not knowing and wonder. Some day, what I never had the courage to say. Meg looked at him for a long moment. The flour was still on her hands. The bread rose quietly under its cloth. Somewhere outside her father moved slowly among the frozen cabbages, giving them, she understood now, all the time in the world. And my father's rent, she said. The physician. The boots at the crossroads. Was that also for Ivy's sake? No, he said, and here, for the first time, something in his composure genuinely faltered. That began before I ever knew your name. I have done it for 2 winters, in 3 parishes, because a man in my position can do a great deal of quiet good if he is willing to do it without his name attached, and because I promised myself, after my wife died, that whatever else I failed at, I would not fail at that. Your father's name came to my attention only after the church wall, when I learned whose daughter had done what I saw. I could not undo 2 years of habit simply because it had by chance come to touch someone I found I could not stop thinking of. I did not tell you that either. I am telling you all of it now, in the order it happened, because you deserve, at the very least, an honest accounting, whatever you decide to do with it. Meg was quiet for a long while. When she spoke again, her voice had gone soft, but not weak. You did not ask to see who I was for anyone's benefit, she said slowly, working it through as she said it. You asked because it was the only way you knew to find out whether goodness like that was real, or whether it only performs itself for an audience. Yes, he said. And then you built a whole house of careful arrangements around that answer, and never once thought to simply ask me, plainly, who I was, and let me tell you myself? No, he admitted. I did not think of that until it was already too late to be simple. She almost smiled at that, though she caught it before it fully arrived. That is a very foolish way for a clever man to behave, Your Grace. Julian, he said quietly, if you would have it. Not yet, she said. You have not earned it yet. But you have come a good deal nearer than you were the last time you stood in front of me. I will not ask you to answer today, he said. I did not come here for an answer. I came because you are owed the truth, whole and plain, whatever it costs me to have given it. If you tell me to go, I will go, and I will not trouble you again, and I will see that your father's rent continues regardless, because that promise was never conditional on you, and it will not become conditional on you now. If you do not tell me to go, I will ask you again in the spring, when the roads are easier, and there has been time enough for you to know your own mind without the cold and the shock of today pressing on it. Your no will be as safe with me as your yes. I would rather have an honest no from you than a yes you gave only because you felt cornered into giving it. Meg looked down at her own hands, red and cracked and dusted with flour. The hands that had given away her boots without thinking, and mended his daughter's boots without knowing why fate had arranged it so, and she thought of Mrs. Pruitt's dry voice at the gate, and of a list of quiet unclaimed kindnesses stretching back 2 winters, and of a small girl's rusted, rebuilt voice saying her father was very sad. Stay for your tea, she said finally. It is a long walk back to Ellesmere, and the road is bad in this cold. That is all I will offer you today, Your Grace. It is not nothing. No, he said, and something in his shut door of a face opened, just slightly, just once, in something that was almost a smile. It is not nothing at all. He stayed for tea. He did not press her further. He spoke instead, haltingly at first and then more easily, about ordinary things, the state of the roads, the price of wool, the particular stubbornness of her father's opinions on both, and Meg found, somewhere in the space of that hour, that the shut door of his face opened a little further each time he forgot to guard it, and that she did not entirely hate what she found on the other side of it. He left before dusk, on foot, back down the frozen lane toward Ellesmere, and he did not look back, which she noticed, and was glad of, because she was not yet ready to be seen watching him go. Spring came late that year, the way it often did in that part of the country, but it came at last, thin green showing at the hedgerows, the frost losing its grip on the lane a little more each morning. Meg mended boots through the last of the cold and thought, more often than she meant to, about a man who had walked 3 miles in the frost to tell her a hard, true thing plainly, and had asked nothing of her in return but the chance to be honest. He kept his word about the rent. It came as it always had, quietly, without comment, and Meg no longer had to wonder at its source, which was, she found, its own strange kind of gift. He did not come again himself. He sent instead small, unremarkable notes carried by the same groom who had first brought her Ellesmere's offer of work, notes about Ivy's progress, a new word learned, a laugh finally heard, nothing that asked anything of her, nothing that pressed. She read each one twice before she folded it away in the tin box under her bed, where she had once kept her mother's few letters, and she told herself this meant nothing beyond ordinary courtesy, and believed it rather less each time she told herself so. It was Ivy, in the end, who brought her back, as Ivy had brought so much else into being, without ever quite understanding the size of what she carried. The child came herself, in April, riding in the Ellesmere gig with Mrs. Pruitt beside her for propriety's sake, and stood at the cobbler's door in her good spring coat, with a small parcel clutched in both hands. "I made you something," Ivy announced without preamble, the words coming easily now, the way words came to a child who had fully remembered how to trust her own voice. "Papa did not ask me to come. I asked him. He said I might, if Mrs. Pruitt came too, and if I promised not to make you feel you had to say yes to anything." Meg crouched to take the parcel, smiling despite herself. "Yes to what, sweetheart? To visiting," Ivy said. "That is all I am allowed to ask for. Papa was very firm about it. He says you are owed your whole choice, and he will not have me spending it for him by accident again." Meg looked past the child to Mrs. Pruitt, who stood by the gig with her hands folded and her face carefully, deliberately unreadable, though something in her eyes suggested she was rather enjoying herself. "He has learned a little, then," Meg said. "He has learned a great deal, I think," Mrs. Pruitt said, "though I would not tell him I said so. It would go to his head." The parcel, when Meg opened it that evening by the fire, was a small square of embroidery, badly stitched in the way of a child still learning her needle, a crooked little horse worked in brown thread against a white ground, and beneath it, in a careful, laborious hand, 6 words: "For being brave when I was not." Meg sat with that square of cloth in her lap for a long while, and this time she did let herself cry, quietly, without shame, because there was no one in the room to see it but the fire, and her own blind father dozing in his chair, and because she had finally understood, turning the little embroidery over in her hands the way she once turned a worn boot, that whatever had begun crookedly, whatever had been built without her knowing, had grown, somewhere along the way, into something entirely honest, made now of nothing but 2 people's plain and willing hearts. She went to Ellesmere the following week, on her own feet, in her own boots, without being sent for. She found him in the garden where he so often was these days, and he came toward her across the gravel, with a carefulness that told her he had not let himself hope too hard for this, and stopped a respectful distance away, hat in hand, waiting, because he had promised his daughter and himself that he would never again spend a single moment of Meg Cargey's choice without her full and knowing consent. "You came," he said. "I came to say," she said, "that I have thought about it all winter, in the plain way I think about most things, turning it over and over the way I turn a boot, looking for the seam that will hold. I find that it holds, Your Grace. I find that a man who could not say a hard true thing in time is not the same as a man who does not mean it once he finally says it. Mrs. Pruitt told me that once, and I did not believe her fully at the time. I believe her now." "Julian," he said again, softly, not quite a correction, more a hope. "Julian," she allowed, and something in his whole shut-door face came open at last, fully, in a way she had genuinely never seen it before, not even close. "I will not rush you," he said. "I told you the spring, and it is only barely spring, and I meant every word of that. I know you did," she said. "That is rather the reason I am standing here at all." He drew off his glove then, slowly, finger by finger, the way a man does a thing he means to be remembered, and held out his bare hand, not to take hers, but simply to offer it, palm open, an invitation and nothing more. "I would ask you to marry me," he said, "if you will let me ask it properly, in words, and not simply in the shape of everything I have already tried and failed to say without them. I love you for the woman who gave away her boots to a boy who could not thank her, believing no one would ever know. I have loved you longer, I think, than I understood, and badly, in ways I am only now learning to do honestly, I would rather have your true no than a yes given out of gratitude, or pity, or the weight of everything my daughter and my housekeeper and my own foolish silence have already put upon you. Tell me only what is true." Meg looked at his open hand for a long moment. Then she set her own bare palm against it, red knuckles and cracked skin and all, and did not draw it back. "Yes," she said. It was the only word she needed, and she found she did not have to search very far for it at all. His fingers closed around hers, careful, as though her hand were something that might yet be startled away, and for a long moment neither of them said anything more, because there was, for once, nothing left that needed saying in words. "I will ask one thing of you," she said finally, when she had found her voice again. "Only one, and I would have it plainly understood between us before anything else is settled. Name it. Never again arrange a thing that touches my heart without telling me you have arranged it," she said. "Speak to me plainly, even when plain is hard. I would rather have your hardest truth on a bad day than another year of your careful silences dressed up as kindness. I have spent my whole life being managed gently by people who thought they knew best what I could bear. I will not spend the rest of it that way too. Not even by you. Especially not by you. You have it," he said, without hesitation, and meant it so plainly that she believed him at once. "Every hard true thing, from this day, said to your face, in time, whatever it costs me to say it." She smiled then, properly, the whole unguarded smile she rarely let anyone see, and he looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been waiting a very long time to be shown. He lifted her bare hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, gently, over the roughness there, the red and the cracked and the work-worn truth of her, and did not apologize for the plainness of what he kissed, because there was, between the two of them now, nothing left to apologize for. They were married that summer, quietly in the small stone church at Fenimore rather than the grand chapel at Ellesmere, because Meg asked for it, and Julian, true to his new and hard-won honesty, refused her nothing that cost him only pride. It was, for a duke's wedding, a very small affair. The bride wore her mended boots. The groom did not seem to mind in the least. Lady Cordelia did not attend. She had removed herself, within a month of the engagement's announcement, to a cousin's house in Bath, where the waters were said to be good for the nerves, and she did not return to Ellesmere, not that year, nor any year after, though a stiff. Correct letter arrived each Christmas which Julian read once, in silence, and set aside without reply, because some doors, he had learned, were better left simply and quietly closed. The beggar boy of Fenimore, grown taller and steadier through 2 winters of Meg's watching from a distance and Julian's quiet, unattached generosity, was apprenticed that autumn to the Ellesmere stables, where he showed, everyone agreed, an uncommon gentle hand with the horses, the kind of hand that only ever came from having once been shown gentleness himself, unasked, by someone who wanted nothing back for it. Josiah Cardew came to live at the Dower Cottage on the Ellesmere grounds, where his failing eyes were tended by the best physician in the county, and his hands, no longer needed for a trade, found new work teaching a small dark-haired girl how to mend a boot properly, seam by patient seam, the way it had once been taught to his own daughter. Mrs. Pruitt remained exactly where she had always been, running the great house with the same dry, unshakable competence, and took, in her later years, a particular quiet pride in reminding the new Duchess, whenever the occasion arose, that she had known how the whole of it would end long before either of the 2 people at the centre of it had worked it out for themselves. A year to the day after Julian had stood in a cobbler's kitchen and told the whole truth of himself for the first time in his life. The two of them sat together by the fire in the small parlour at Ellesmere. Ivy curled between them on the hearthrug with the wooden horse, worn smooth now with 2 years of handling, cradled against her chest. Outside, the first frost of the new winter had begun to silver the garden, and inside, the fire cracked and settled, and by the door, in a neat and ordinary row, stood 4 pairs of boots. Julian's, Meg's, Ivy's small ones, and beside them a 4th, smaller still, set out with quiet ceremony, waiting for a child not yet born but already, in the settled certainty of that warm room, entirely loved. No one had stolen any of them, no one needed to any longer. They were given freely now, the way the first pair had been given, long ago, on a frozen road, to a stranger who could offer nothing back. Julian reached over and took his wife's bare hand in his, lacing his fingers through hers by the firelight, and did not let go, and outside in the cold garden a single rook called once, and then fell silent, and the maxim of it settled over the room, the way frost settles on a wall, slow and heavy and sure. A person's truest measure is never taken in the rooms where they are watched. It is taken in the cold, in the dark, on the roads no one thinks to follow, in the small unwitnessed moment when the whole world has turned away. And only the heart, quietly, keeps its own account. That is where this story began, on a frozen road that owed her nothing, and that is where, in the end, it was always going to be won. If a story like this one warms something in you, the kind of quiet goodness that asks for nothing and gets found out anyway, then I would love for you to subscribe to the channel, so these tales of hidden hearts and honest hands keep finding their way to you. I would also love to know, in the comments below, what you would have done in Meg's place. Standing in that boot room, the moment you learned a kindness you thought was simply yours had been quietly shaped by someone else's hand. Would you have forgiven as slowly and as fully as she did? Or would the wound of it have cut deeper and lasted longer? Tell me honestly. I read every word. Thank you for staying with Meg and her Duke all the way to the fireside at the end. There is another story waiting for you very soon, another quiet kindness, another watching heart, and I cannot wait to share it with you.